An American packed 2 suitcases expecting Australia to be a temporary adventure. The plan was simple: stay for 1 year, earn some money, enjoy the beaches, then return home. Friends threw a farewell party, family promised to visit. Even he believed the move was only temporary. 12 months later, something unexpected happened. He extended his visa. 2 years after that, he applied for permanent residency. Today, nearly a decade later, Australia is no longer the place he moved to. It is simply home. His story is far from unique. Every year, thousands of Americans arrive in Australia expecting a short experience, only to discover that leaving becomes much harder than they ever imagined. It isn't because Australia is perfect. Every country has challenges. But there are certain parts of Australian life that quietly change people's expectations of what everyday living should feel like. They don't always notice it immediately. It happens gradually. One ordinary day blends into the next until they suddenly realize they no longer want to go back. Today we're exploring 7 reasons why so many Americans move to Australia and end up staying far longer than they ever planned. Stay until the end, because the final reason isn't about beaches, weather, or money. It's something people only understand after living in Australia for several years, and many say it's the biggest reason of all. Australians, what made you realize your country was special? Americans living in Australia, what made you decide to stay? Share your experience in the comments. The first surprise begins before many Americans even unpack their bags. They quickly notice that life feels slower, not lazy, not unproductive, simply less rushed. Imagine finishing work on a sunny afternoon, and instead of immediately sitting in traffic for hours, people head to the beach, meet friends for coffee, take their children to a local park, or simply enjoy an evening walk. Success in Australia certainly matters, but many newcomers feel there is also a stronger expectation that life should include time outside work. Americans often arrive expecting the same non-stop pace they experience back home. Instead, they discover colleagues encouraging them to take annual leave, spend weekends outdoors, and actually disconnect after work. It feels unusual at first. Some even feel guilty for relaxing. But after several months, many begin asking themselves a question they had never considered before. What if life isn't supposed to be lived in constant hurry? Australians rarely think about this because it has shaped their culture for generations. Long weekends, outdoor gatherings, and holidays with family are treated as important parts of life rather than rewards earned only after years of hard work. Visitors often describe it as breathing a little easier without realizing why. Australians, have you always appreciated this balance, or did you only notice it after traveling overseas? The second reason surprises Americans every single week. They discover just how connected Australians are to the outdoors. Walk through almost any Australian city on a Saturday morning, and you'll see runners along waterfront paths, families cycling together, surfers carrying boards before sunrise, children playing cricket in local parks, and friends gathering around public barbecue areas. Spending time outside isn't viewed as a special occasion. It's simply woven into everyday life. Australia's climate certainly helps, but the culture plays an equally important role. Instead of staying indoors whenever free time appears, many Australians naturally look for excuses to be outside. Americans moving from colder regions often find themselves changing habits they had followed for years. Weekend shopping trips slowly become beach mornings. Restaurant dinners become picnics. Evening television becomes sunset walks. They don't consciously decide to change, the environment quietly changes them. Months later, they look back and realize they spend far less time inside than they once did. Australians may not even notice this because they've always had parks, walking trails, and beaches within easy reach. For newcomers, however, this outdoor lifestyle becomes one of the first things they genuinely miss whenever they leave Australia. We've covered 2 reasons already, but the next 5 become even more interesting because they aren't what most people expect. One of them changes how Americans think about work forever, while another completely reshapes the meaning of community. Stay with us because the final reason is the one people say they miss most after moving away. The third reason often appears on payday. Americans who move to Australia naturally compare salaries with what they earned back home. At first glance, some prices seem higher. Rent, groceries, or certain services can cost more depending on where you live. But many newcomers also discover that wages, workplace protections, and employee benefits can feel quite different. They notice paid annual leave becoming a normal expectation. Sick leave exists, so people don't feel pressured to work while ill. Public holidays are actually holidays for many workers. Conversations about work-life balance become common rather than unusual. Of course, every profession is different, and individual experiences vary, but many Americans describe a growing feeling that life is designed around people instead of expecting people to constantly revolve around work. That realization doesn't usually happen during the first week. It develops slowly as they experience birthdays they don't miss because of work, weekends that remain free, and holidays they actually take. Australians often consider these things ordinary because they grew up expecting them. Americans sometimes describe them as surprisingly life-changing. Australians, did you ever realize these benefits felt unusual to visitors from overseas, or has this always seemed completely normal? Then comes something almost impossible to measure: friendliness. Australians have a reputation for being informal. Titles often disappear quickly. Conversations start with complete strangers. A neighbor waves while mowing the lawn. Someone jokes with you while standing in line for coffee. The cashier asks how your weekend went and genuinely waits for the answer. Americans frequently mention that these small interactions create a sense of belonging long before they build close friendships. Nobody is pretending life is perfect. Cities still have busy people, stressful days, and occasional unfriendly encounters. But many newcomers feel the overall culture encourages approachability. People laugh together more easily. Conversations feel less formal. Even workplaces often reflect this relaxed communication style. The first time an American hears their manager say, "Just call me by my first name," it can feel surprisingly different. Over time, these small moments quietly build confidence. Newcomers stop feeling like outsiders and begin feeling like neighbors. Australians, when was the last time you started a conversation with someone you had never met before without thinking twice? For many visitors, that simple habit says more about Australian culture than any famous landmark ever could. The fifth reason usually arrives on an ordinary Saturday morning. An American walks into a neighborhood cafe expecting to grab a quick coffee before moving on with the day. Instead, they notice something unusual. Nobody seems to be rushing. Friends have been talking for nearly an hour over a single cup of coffee. Families laugh together without constantly checking their phones. Cyclists stop after an early morning ride, surfers arrive barefoot from the beach, and elderly couples enjoy breakfast while reading the newspaper. The atmosphere feels relaxed but never lazy. Australians don't simply drink coffee. They often treat cafes as community spaces where conversations matter as much as the coffee itself. Many Americans are surprised by how much value Australians place on slowing down, even for a short part of the day. They soon find themselves doing the same. What begins as a quick coffee run slowly becomes a weekly tradition. Before long, they know the barista by name, have a favorite table, and realize they haven't thought about work once during breakfast. These moments seem small, yet they quietly transform daily life. Australians rarely notice this because it has always been part of their routine. Visitors often remember it long after they've returned home. Australians, do you still appreciate your local cafe, or has it simply become another part of everyday life? By now, many Americans have settled into their new routines, but the sixth reason is often the one that surprises them the most. It isn't about money, weather, or famous landmarks. It's about feeling safe. Imagine taking an evening walk after dinner through a quiet suburb. Children are still riding bicycles. Neighbors greet each other from their front gardens. Joggers pass by wearing headphones. Parents watch their kids play in nearby parks. Of course, no country is completely free of crime, and Australia has areas with their own challenges, just like anywhere else. But many Americans describe feeling a greater sense of everyday security in many Australian communities. They notice people leaving picnic blankets unattended for a few minutes without panic. Children walking to nearby parks. Families spending long evenings outdoors. These are ordinary moments that slowly change how newcomers experience daily life. Safety is something people rarely think about until they experience a different level of comfort. Australians often grow up assuming these routines are normal. Americans sometimes realize only after arriving that constantly feeling alert had become part of their old routine. That quiet sense of security becomes difficult to give up once it becomes part of everyday life. We've reached the final reason, and it's the one that thousands of Americans mention after living in Australia for several years. It isn't something they notice during their first week. It isn't even something they can easily explain to friends back home. It takes time to understand. But once they do, it often changes everything. Imagine boarding a flight after years of living in Australia. You're heading back to the United States to visit family. You're excited to see everyone again, but as the plane lifts off, an unexpected feeling appears. Australia already feels like home. The beaches, the neighborhood cafe, the local supermarket, The weekend barbecues, the friendly conversations with strangers, the slower evenings, the endless blue skies. They've all become part of your identity. You realize you no longer think of Australia as the country you moved to. It's simply where your life happens now. Many Americans describe this moment as surprisingly emotional. Home is no longer defined only by where they were born. It's defined by where they feel most at peace. The seventh reason is belonging. Australians often welcome newcomers into local communities through everyday life rather than grand gestures. It might be an invitation to a backyard barbecue, joining a local sports club, chatting with neighbors over the fence, or simply being greeted by familiar faces at the same cafe every morning. These repeated, ordinary interactions slowly build something much bigger than friendship. They create a feeling that you are part of the community. That sense of belonging cannot be bought. It cannot be rushed. It grows through hundreds of small moments that hardly seem important until one day you realize they have changed your life. Many Americans who plan to stay for only a year discover that leaving becomes far more difficult than arriving. They start missing things they never expected to miss. The smell of eucalyptus after rain, weekend trips to the coast, watching colorful parrots fly across suburban skies, greeting the same neighbors every morning, the sound of waves after work instead of traffic, the familiar smile from the local cafe staff. None of these experiences are world-famous tourist attractions, yet together they become the real Australia that visitors rarely see in travel advertisements. This doesn't mean Australia is perfect. Every country has challenges. Housing affordability, distance from family overseas, the cost of living and adapting to a different culture are all very real experiences. But for many Americans, the positives gradually outweigh the difficulties. They don't fall in love with Australia because of one spectacular moment. They fall in love with thousands of ordinary moments that quietly improve everyday life. Perhaps that's the biggest lesson of all. The happiest places are not always defined by famous landmarks or dramatic scenery. They are often defined by how life feels on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Can you enjoy a walk after work? Do you know your neighbors? Can you spend time outdoors with your family? Do you have time to slow down occasionally? These simple questions shape daily happiness far more than many people realize. So maybe the real question isn't why so many Americans move to Australia. Maybe the better question is why so many struggle to leave once they've experienced life there. The answer isn't found in a single beach, city, or attraction. It's found in the quiet rhythm of everyday Australian life, a rhythm that slowly becomes impossible to forget. Australians, what do you think is the biggest reason people fall in love with your country? If you've moved to Australia from another part of the world, what was the exact moment you realized you wanted to stay? We'd love to hear your story in the comments because every experience adds another perspective to the conversation. And if you enjoyed this documentary, there's another fascinating comparison coming next, where we'll explore everyday Australian habits that continue to amaze first-time American visitors. Some of them seem completely ordinary to Australians, yet they leave visitors asking the same question every time. How is this just normal here? You won't want to miss it.